Mycorrhizal. Mycorrhizal.
Here you go, Jeff.
Mycorrhizal fungi, period. I mean, I think it's the most important thing you can use. I know that our plants don't always grow long enough for them to fully develop. I know that in some situations they don't sporulate, but I also know that when I don't use them, I don't get plants anywhere near what I get when I use mycorrhizal fungi. You must use mycorrhizal fungi from the get-go. Roll the seeds in them, period.
Excellent. Well, I like activated aerated compost tea because, man, that stuff, it just saves the garden. It's beautiful. It doesn't take that long to make. It's really quick and eat, well, about 24 hours, 48 hours. But you can just throw a little bit of, first you have your base mix and you put air in there and everything just grows like exponentially. And you can spray the activated aerated compost tea on the leaves, on the soil, everything. And what it does, it just outproduces anything bad. And it works. It's great for to overcome powdery mildew, which is a huge problem. And it works for everything else. And it also adds to the biology of the soil and activates everything. It's wonderful stuff. Can't say enough good things about it.
And then George here said aerated compost tea, both of which I am a huge fan of. And to elaborate for those who don't quite understand these two products, organisms, functions, the way they work, and my understanding of it, the way mycorrhizae works is mycorrhizae is a symbiotic fungus. It's going to create a relationship with your plant that helps both the fungi and the plant. So say my finger was your typical plant root. Well, your typical plant root can only suck water and nutrition from about 1 millimeter away. It's called the zone of depletion. Now, if you were to imagine that same finger with a giant friggin' living cotton ball strapped to it, and that cotton ball's only purpose in life is to bring back water, nutrition, unlock things out of the soil, mine the stuff you need, bring it back to the plant. The plant will then, in turn, turn that into sugars, carbohydrates through photosynthesis, and give that fungus a little kickback. But what you've done by adding that product is you've exponentially increased your root surface area, up to 1,000% in some cases. Then, fungi and bacteria start consuming that. What they consume and what they turn that into is things like cytokinetics, gibberellic acid, but fertilizer for that plant. That plant then takes up that poop from the bacteria and the fungi and grows more plant. It's the circle of life. So back to aerated compost tea. Compost tea is one of those things that, like George said, you're breeding millions and billions of things that are really good for your plant. So when you put that on your plant, not only is it going to break down your organic matter and feed it to your plant, but you've also outcompeted all of your harmful pathogens. Plants have only so many inoculation sites. It's like an apartment complex. There's only so many homes that can be lived in. And when you've got those all filled with something beneficial, it's really hard for something negative to come back in. I compare it to like a bank robber in a police station. It just ain't going to happen. Whereas with the aerated compost tea, you're spraying fungi and protozoa, things that break down organics. When you're coating your plant in that, and say a little powdery mildew spore comes flying through the air and lands on your plant, it just gets consumed, turned into another part of the food web. So that being said, getting back to the pathogen side of things, what are some of the bigger problems you've run into with organic gardening and some of their solutions that you've found?
Few problems.
When you team with the microbes, you don't get problems. If I want to make a bacterial tea, I'll add a little bit of molasses. Normally, I won't add anything because what happens? The bacteria just go gangbusters anyway, and I don't want them to overtake the fungi.
I'm absolutely of the same belief.
Yeah, so I don't use sugars unless it's really crazy. But if you were going to use sugars, it'd be for the cannabis plant because the cannabis plant is incredibly bacterially. They love bacteria. That doesn't mean they don't like the mycorrhizal fungi, but they like good bacterially dominated soil. And I would say the last thing I do is not only do I make a compost tea, but once the plant is up, running, has a set of leaves, I'll take a handful of straw or a handful of hay and make a protozoa tea because hay and straw is covered with protozoa. Each protozoa, those little paramecium we studied in high school, they eat 10,000 bacteria a day. They're crazy and recycle nitrogen and carbon and crazy. So if you make a tea of this stuff and put it down after, say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks of growth, in about 2 weeks, each one of those will be absolutely cycling nutrients for you like crazy. So you take a bucket of water, maybe your compost tea brewer. If it's just a bucket of water, you stir it every now and then just to keep some oxygen in it, or you use your tea brewer. In 48 hours, you'll have so many paramecium, you can see them in the compost tea. You put that down and you're going to be cycling nitrogen like no one's business. There's a time when you don't want to be doing it, but early on, it makes a great deal of sense. So those are the two things I do.
Right on, Jeff.
And then I'm thinking, how can I diversify my colony? How many things can I put in there to inoculate this brew? I'm going to put yogurt. I'm going to put miso. I'm going to put kefir. I'm going to put maybe like the white mold that's growing on top of the jelly in your refrigerator. That's also a wonderful beneficial. I'm going to take some indigenous microorganisms from way high up, you know, in the mountains, because the higher in elevation that you go, the stronger the microbial colonies are in that zone. Maybe I'm gonna, on our way back north, I'm gonna stop in the redwoods and I'm gonna get a handful of soil, because I know that that handful of soil is also yet another inoculant. I'm diversifying that brew more and more and more, so that when it comes to that fermentation process, I've got as many beneficials in there, and I use my compost tea or my compost as another inoculant in that brew to then grow out into a fermentation. It lasts about 10 days. You let it ferment. It gets a beautiful white layer on the top of it, and then you add your aerator to it, and then it's ready to drench within 24 and 48 hours.
Yeah, I'd like to elaborate on that a little bit. There's a lot of people that ask the question, do you want a diverse mycorrhizae or do you want a single species mycorrhizae? And there's a lot of beliefs out there. And what our company has come to realize, we grow 9 different types of endomycorrhizae. We have blends, we have single species, we have it all. But for our cannabis industry, we do a single species. And there's a reason we do that. When you put 7, 8, 9 species on a plant's root system, they don't all live happily ever after. They're all competing for food and resources, and until one species gets a hold of that food source, it can't grow a fruiting body. So, and your fruiting body is what gives you the benefit, that hyphae. So why cover your root system in 7, 8, 9 things that are going to slow down the process when you can cover it in the right one? It gets all the food source and grows a ton of fruiting body. Now, the argument is you want diversity, because different strains, like different strains of mycorrhizae and different species of mycorrhizae associate with this. And yes, if you're growing a forest, of course you want diversity because you have a diversified ecosystem. But when you're growing a fast-growing annual, you want one species that's going to get the food source and sometimes going to inoculate in less than a week when it's not going through all that competition, grows a huge fruiting body, and you get a huge benefit out of it. Now, once again, if it's an ecosystem, you of course want diversity, because genetic diversity is what leads to everything.